Hi students. This is a short video to talk briefly about the process for constructing arguments. At this point you've learned how to evaluate arguments, you've learned how to reconstruct arguments, and so really constructing your own arguments is pretty simple. There's not much more to it. You've got a basic idea. But I'm just going to describe a quick 5-step sort of process for constructing arguments, which is a process that you might find helpful going forward. Now I should warn you, caution, right? This is a construction area ahead, so authorized personnel only. You're lucky you have authorization. Okay, that's a bad joke, but let's continue. So constructing arguments, as I say, can be tricky. Ideally, when we're constructing arguments, we would start with our premises, apply them to the case in question, and then arrive at some conclusion. So the arguments that we'll be making are often for some conclusion about how we should act or how we should believe what we should do. And ideally, we would start with some principles here about like principles of action, and then that we could apply to the situation, or principles of belief, then apply them to the situation and arrive at our conclusion. But oftentimes what we find is that we've already arrived with a conclusion. We know what we want people to believe before we've gone about sort of before we've figured out what our premises are, maybe. And so we're just going to start with our conclusion and then figure out, okay, how do I construct an argument around that conclusion? Again, maybe that's not the ideal way to do things, but that'll be good enough for our purposes here. As I say, not ideal, but we can work with it. Okay, so let's consider the following claim. Marijuana use should or shouldn't be legal. Here what we're going to do, if we want to construct an argument, say we're like asked to weigh in on whether marijuana use should or shouldn't be legal. The first step, right, is to figure out what conclusion we want to argue for. So do we want to argue that marijuana use should be legal, or do we want to argue that it shouldn't be legal? Let's argue, let's consider arguing for the conclusion that it should be legal. The next step we're going to take is to figure out why we believe that conclusion. What is it about marijuana use that makes us think that it should be legal? Or, alternatively, what is it about marijuana use that makes us think it shouldn't be legal? This process, as I say here, it involves introspection. You've got to look inside your head and sort of figure out, why do I think what I think about marijuana use? What would I say, or what's a sort of simple way of putting my evidence for the conclusion that marijuana use should be legal? What I would encourage you to do is to just try to come up with one sentence that explains why you believe that conclusion. So not a long sentence even, right? Like just picking out 1 or 2 features of marijuana use maybe that makes you think, yeah, that thing should be legal for this reason or that reason. The next step is to put what you have in standard form. So we take our conclusion, we take our premise that we've got, we put it into standard form, and then we identify the implicit premise. What's missing here? As I say, what premise do you need to get from the premise you have to the conclusion? Finally, step 5, strengthen your argument by modifying its premises. So the first run through, right, you've got some argument, but now try to make it stronger. Can you say something that makes people a bit more convinced that your argument's good? Maybe you can add some conditions on to the premises, something like that would sort of do more to convince your audience that you've got the right conclusion. Your goal, after all, is to construct the strongest argument that you can, but it's also important that the conclusion does a relatively good job of reflecting your actual thinking. So you're sort of going for both of those things at the same time. Is my argument strong? Does it reflect how I think about this issue? And if it's weak, obviously you want it to be improved. If it doesn't really reflect your thinking, you want it to be improved. And so that's why you say like modifying your premises after that first run through maybe is one way to get the argument where you really want it to be. Now, if you don't have the argument reflect your actual thinking, then you're arguing in bad faith. So you're not really giving the true reasons why you think what you think, and that is not good, right? As I say here, like I think that's a vice that's opposed to intellectual courage, but you're not standing up for what you believe in, and it's intellectually dishonest, right? Which is dishonesty is not good, right? Honesty is good, and so I would discourage you from that. When we give arguments, we want to give arguments we actually believe in. All right, so I've made this conclusion sort of small here, and I'm going to try and give an argument. And so what steps do I follow? Let's look at an example, right? So step 1, figure out which conclusion I want to argue for. So I'm going to argue, as I said, for the conclusion that marijuana use should be legal. Step 2, figure out why I believe that conclusion. There are a lot of different ways to argue for the legalization of marijuana use. You might say, it's just fun and it doesn't harm anyone, or something along those lines. What I'm going to say here is I'm going to say that tobacco use is legal. So you might say, well, how is that related, John? The idea is like, well, tobacco use is legal and marijuana use is kind of the same thing, and so marijuana use should be legal too. So the reason why I think marijuana use should be legal is because tobacco use is legal. So that's my first premise. That's my reason. So let's put what I have in standard form. Okay, I have the premises in. I want to identify the implicit premise. So tobacco use is legal. I'll call that T. My conclusion is M. How do I get from T to M? Well, I just get a premise that says T arrow M. That's what I'm looking for. So if T, then M. If tobacco use is legal, then marijuana use should be legal. Okay, there, I've identified my implicit premise. So, finally, fifth step, strengthen the argument by modifying its premises. There are a number of different ways you could do this. So, for example, you might say, well, really what I'm interested in here is recreational marijuana use. Marijuana use, maybe you think medicinal use is already legal, so maybe I want to be more clear that I'm arguing for the permissibility of recreational use. So that's one way. You could say recreational tobacco use is legal, and if that's legal, then recreational marijuana use should be legal, so recreational marijuana use should be legal. Alternatively, another way to do it is say tobacco use is legal for adults, and if tobacco use is legal for adults, then marijuana use should be legal for adults as well. Conclusion, therefore, marijuana use should be legal for adults. Maybe that argument's a little bit stronger. Maybe it does a better job of being clear about what I'm trying to argue for. But it's not only strengthening your argument. It's not always just for like clarifying what your conclusion is, but sometimes you might think you can make your premises themselves stronger. So there's no science to this. It's it's an art a little bit. You have to try it and do it sometimes, and then over time you'll figure out what works best for you. But anyway, that's just a quick sort of, like I said, quick 5-step process for figuring out how to construct arguments. Hopefully that's helpful going forward. All right, bye.